Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Bob Still. The size of the radiology specialty as a whole has and continues to grow year over year. Even though COVID has had an impact on imaging volume since 2020, data and trends continue to show, in large part because of the aging population of us baby boomers, that there will be continued demand for radiology services well into the future. Because of the continued growth of the radiology sector, we've seen a change in radiology landscape over the last 5 to 7 years. There seem to be two contributing factors forcing change. One, hospital systems are getting bigger and either employing radiologists or asking existing radiology groups to consolidate. And two, the reemergence of private equity-backed corporate radiology efforts. It seems that these two factors are forcing many radiology groups to consider several options about their future. Should they go it alone, expand regionally by merger or MSO, expand nationally by MSO, approach the hospital about employment, or sell your practice? Joining me today are Tom Schovee and Dr. Kevin Woolley. Tom is the CEO of MBMS, a national radiology-specific billing company that provides services to over 1,600 radiologists across the country. Tom has always remained up to speed on the forces impacting radiology. Dr. Kevin Woolley is the past president of Colorado Imaging Associates, based in Denver, Colorado. CIA is a group of 46 radiologists providing radiology and interventional radiology services covering 8 hospitals, 14 imaging centers, and multiple outpatient locations and rural clinics in Colorado and Kansas. Dr. Woolley is also a member of the radiologist-owned management services organization, or MSO, called United Radiology. And I apologize, that's Unified Radiology. Unified Radiology consists of 11 independent radiology groups from around the country that are all equal owners in the organization. The three of us will talk today specifically about the decisions many radiology groups are considering. Should we remain an independent private practice radiology group, and what options exist to best position ourselves for the future? Do we need to get bigger? Do we need to expand into and partner with other hospital-based specialists to enhance our bargaining position? In doing some research on radiologist behavior, I'd like to talk through an industry-based pie chart that highlights the percentages around how radiologists are employed, small to medium-sized independent practices, large independent practice, and hospital-employed academic professional associations, or PE, private equity-backed radiology, which has gotten a lot of publicity recently, but actually makes up less than 10% of total radiologists and hospital-employed radiologists. It really hasn't grown much. So let's talk more about independent private practice radiology with Tom Schovee and Dr. Woolley. Tom, how are you? Welcome. And you and I go back many years, and I've always felt you've had the pulse of what's happening in radiology. What's different now, Tom, than when we first met and started talking over 10 years ago over breakfast at the diner?
Yeah, I remember those days, and we need to get back into that, Bob.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of change over the last 10 years, and I would say there are 3 words that explain what the major changes have been: consolidation in the healthcare industry, radiology technology, and then teleradiology, or remote reading of studies. And let me go through each one of those. So from a consolidation standpoint, 10 years ago, there were a lot of independent hospitals that had separate radiology groups servicing them, and they had no affiliation with other hospitals in their particular area. Also, there are many more payers that small payers that service different special groups of folks. And so since 10 years ago, there's been a massive consolidation of healthcare systems. We've got 4 healthcare systems that are national, that control 2,000 of the hospitals around the country. And many of the regional community hospitals have grown dramatically. We have a number of groups that are 2-3 times the size they were 10 years ago, because their health system acquired local hospitals and consolidated the particular area. And with payers, there's 4 major payers now across the country that control 30 to 40% of all the covered lives. And then if you add in Medicare and Medicaid, that's 2/3 to 3/4 of the entire population of the United States controlled by less people. And they just have a lot more leverage now. And so that leads groups, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to have to get larger, to be able to have more leverage with payers, be able to cover their larger health systems. In the area of technology, largely 10 years ago, that wasn't an important factor for an independent radiology group. Generally, you'd rely on your health system. They provided the PACS, the dictation, all of that. But following the need to get bigger, radiology groups have had to invest in technology, specifically PACS systems, work lists, some artificial intelligence tools, and largely driven as you grow and you get to be 60 plus radiologists, you become a subspecialized group typically. And so then it's all about taking the facilities and the doctors and lining them up and getting the right study to the right doctor. And that takes some sophistication, because generally groups have doctors sitting all over the country. It isn't just around the hospitals anymore. And if you have a subspecialist that's servicing, 30 hospitals, you have to be able to funnel those studies, and it has to be very reliable, and it's a pretty sophisticated system. And then the final thing is technology. 10 years ago, as we were talking at the diner, it was times when people were doing preliminary reads. VRAD and Nighthawk started, and they do preliminary reads, and then in the morning, the radiology group get up and overread. And that was probably 5 to 10% of the studies. Right before the pandemic, that had all shifted, almost all of it, to final reads. And about 15% of all studies were remote versus on-site. And then it jumped up to almost 50% during the pandemic. And it really hasn't gone back down much. Part of it is that hospitals are having a harder time justifying bringing radiologists back on site when they were serviced perfectly well in a remote sort of setting. So teleradiology has become a crucial part of any group. And if you're a large group, it's a pretty, sophisticated and large operation, which would include an operations center that's kind of like the air traffic controllers, making sure it's all working, 24/7. So anyway, those 3 things have led groups to consolidate. And if you go back 10 years, there was one group over 100 radiologists. Today there's 20, and people are predicting in the next 3 to 4 years, they're going to be 50. So the size of the groups, the number of large groups has changed dramatically, adjusting to what is happening in the industry. The one thing that hasn't changed is most everybody still wants to work for an independent group. Recent studies say 83% of all residents want to work for an independent group, not a hospital, not an academic setting, not a corporate group. So a lot's changed, Bob.
Yeah. And you and I have talked about that.
I bet the breakfast at the diner is still the same.
It's a little more expensive. Everything, everybody's taking liberty with eggs, the chickens are, it's fascinating, managing, as I did in 22 years in radiology, we would have conversations periodically over the years about groups in our area coming together. What have you seen? We talk about coming together. What does that mean to come together as groups in today's world, virtual world, which really changed over the last 2 years during COVID?
Yeah, so it means a lot of things, and I think one of the critical components that's kind of been missing is an education about both the different structures that you can work your way to, but the process to get there. And what I find is that, the first step of the process is to get to know your neighbor. Seems a real simple thing. You have a radiology group servicing a hospital up the highway or whatever, is to sit down in a social setting, typically a dinner, and get to know the other folks. I mean, are these people that you could work with, want to work with? And, assuming the dinner goes well, and we've had a few of those, Bob, with radiology groups, how could we help each other? And, there's a myriad of ways that groups could help one another. And you get started with those things. And then if you get to the point of, gosh, we'd probably be better together than we are apart, then you start talking about, the structures. And, oftentimes it's driven by external forces. You see you need more leverage with payers, or there's a competitor that's come into the area, a variety of things. But what I would say is the formal getting together happens best when it's in a proactive situation. There's a number of examples that I have where hospitals have forced people's hands and people reluctantly come together and resent it, and it ends up being not a great situation. I have a situation where 5 groups were cajoled over, 5 years to try to come together. They didn't do it. And finally they were called in to the hospital, and the hospital said, you got a year to get together, or we're giving you to a national company. They got together, but they really didn't. And
the planned marriage, right? Yeah.
Right. So be proactive about it. And so the 3 structures are, you can come together in an MSO, which is your management functions, your finance, your HR, recruiting, administrative leadership, billing, those kinds of things, and have a separate entity for the physician groups. That's one. Number 2 is a divisionalized merger, which you come together as one entity, but the practices remain as separate divisions and set up their own comp schedule, vacation, manage the hospital relationships. And so you are able to keep, a bunch of your autonomy that you had as an independent group. And then there's a full merger that there isn't divisions. Everybody has the same, comp schedule, those sorts of things. And you can imagine, as you go from MSO to a full merger, 2 things happen. You lose some of your autonomy, but you gain security and strength. So that's the call that, groups have to make.
Yeah. And I know, Tom, you brought a wealth of experience from your many, many years with Procter & Gamble, a large company, into basically at the time you came in kind of a cottage industry. And I'm sure there's a lot of examples of what you can bring from a large organization like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah. So let's move to Dr. Kevin Woolley. Dr. Woolley, you ran a sizable group in a major market, Denver, Colorado. What do you see as the challenges of running a successful radiology practice?
Yeah, these factors that Tom's been discussing and that you've been discussing are very real in our market. Our market has consolidated from about 12 groups between the southern suburbs of Denver and the Wyoming border 30 years ago to 5 groups now.
Wow.
There's continual pressure for subspecialty interpretations and for interventional coverage. Our practice covers 6 hospitals in Metro Denver over about a 50-mile radius. And it's very difficult logistically for a group of a small size to be able to provide interventional coverage in more than one location. And our health systems have similarly consolidated. Our major hospital partner 10 years ago was a 30-hospital not-for-profit regional entity, and now it's 140 hospitals based over in Chicago. And the health systems in general in our region like to have a single presence so that they have one group to discuss coverage issues with. They don't like fragmentation and silos. They like to have a single entity providing the work that they need. And that doesn't just hold for radiology. That holds for all the clinical service lines that are important
Sure.
to systems.
How how can working with other like-minded radiology groups across the country help individual groups like Colorado Imaging Associates?
We've seen tremendous value in Unified Radiology with being able to periodically meet with and learn from our colleagues in other parts of the country. There are parts of the country where the demands in terms of the health systems are different, but there are a lot more similarities than there are differences. And in some instances, we've learned from markets where the corporatization of radiology is more advanced. We've learned from mistakes that have been made elsewhere. We've taken best practices from practices that are more forward-thinking than ours is. There's also a certain strength that comes with size, and that can be both regional and national. We believe in the long run that even a regional group, as our group is in the mid 40s, is not going to be of sufficient size to provide our health system and our patients what they need.
So it goes way beyond joining together to buy, paper towel or, rubber gloves, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It goes to potentially clinical integration and the scale that we need to provide coverage. One other example are the benefits of time differences between the different practices for teleradiology coverage. There's a 2-hour difference from where we are to the East Coast. There's the potential for someone who can work in a day shift on the East Coast and help us out in the early morning. Similarly, there's a potential for us to work into the evening and help a practice out on the East Coast. Or, the time differences are very helpful when it comes to teleradiology coverage, and we can potentially leverage those time zone differences to help for clinical care.
That's really interesting, Tom. And understanding that groups working together is a benefit. How do you see these regional partnerships like Unified Radiology working?
Yeah, so any of these partnerships, whether it's a national MSO like Unified or larger regional groups coming together, the advantages are 4 things. Could be and usually all of these are in play: financial performance, operational efficiency, clinical operations, and the future market outlook can be brighter under these circumstances. So for financial, it's pretty simple. I mean, you have more negotiating power. You can get better payer contracts. You can get better deals for medical malpractice. You can potentially improve your contracts with a hospital. So there's real financial, upside with those situations. And then the other one that's often forgotten is that the larger the group is, the larger investments they can make, because you have more partners, more financial resources to go to. So when you need technology, you need better management, you need to put together a teleradiology solution, you're just financially stronger and able to do that if you're larger. Mm-hmm. Operational efficiency, you have the ability to attract a better management team. And some of that is, in the people that you can attract, but a lot of that is the fact that you can subspecialize your management team. You can have payer contracting people, you can have recruiting people, finance people, all of that when, a 10 to 15 person radiology group probably has one administrator trying to play all those hats at, one time. And honestly, you can probably do it for maybe even less and have better management. So that's an operational efficiency. And then, as we talked about, being able to have a PACS work list system across the practice is really helpful in operational efficiency, and then marry it with a teleradiology solution that gives everybody more flexibility. Clinical operations, we talked a bit about that. Once you get over 60, you can subspecialize, and that adds a lot of advantages to a practice. You can potentially improve the quality of the reads. You can do them more productively, and it's a better recruiting tool. A lot of the radiologists coming out of fellowship end up going to an academic practice because they want to practice their subspecialty that they've gone to medical school for. And if you're a large practice with subspecialty, you can hire those people because they can come and they know they can spend time in their subspecialty. Now, of course, all of this, you need technology and teleradiology, which, loops back to the financial picture.
Sure.
Finally, it's, the market outlook. If you get bigger and expand with your health system, you've got an opportunity to be financially stronger, gives you more staying power. But if you think about a particular region, your neighboring radiology group, would you rather compete with them or collaborate with them? So in most cases, assuming the cultures are similar and you can convince the hospital systems that it's a good deal, you're much better off coming together and being better as one than competing against one another. And then the final point on that is your opportunity to diversify outside of a particular hospital system that gives you more strength and staying power.
Do you think coming together regionally, like a unified, has the same effect on small to medium-sized practice, which I think the industry defines as 15 physicians or less, as well as the larger size practices? Are there equal benefits to both size practices doing this?
Well, I wouldn't say that they were equal, but I would say there's advantages to both, and there's potential trade-offs to both. But in the end, when it all gets done, it's a positive for both the small and the large group. For the small groups, as you said, 15 or less, there's 900 of those groups in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And they make up just less than 50% of all radiologists in the country. And they're under tremendous pressure. Hospital requirements, payer requirements, state and local government, federal government. It's just become really difficult to run those practices, under the current configuration. And so for them, the trade-off is to be able to give up some autonomy and join a larger group in whatever flavor of organization it is. But as part of that, gaining security, and oftentimes you're able to pick up, more flexible hour arrangements, particularly if the group you're joining has a teleradiology solution. And in some cases, it could be an improvement to compensation as well. So that's, for the small group trade-off. For the big groups, as they get bigger, as we've said, they're going to want to be subspecialized and they're going to want to invest in technology and so forth. What bigger groups need to do is invest in their infrastructure. And we've talked about it: better management, technology platform, and a teleradiology service. And then it becomes relatively easy to add smaller groups into that. And it's an advantage to both. And again, they get to grow and expand, become more relevant in their market, and probably benefit financially and schedule-wise.
Sure. Yeah, investing in those human assets, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So Dr. Woolley, maybe a little bit more about the benefits clinically of coming together in unified radiology. I find that interesting. I know groups many years ago struggled with this. Should we be generalist or specialist? And there just wasn't enough manpower to be totally specialized. How have you seen that change over the years?
Yeah, that's changed as radiology has become more virtualized. The old model was a group of 10 or 12 radiologists serving a given hospital in a single location, working predominantly on site, in some cases outsourcing overnight. That model in the state of Colorado is largely extinct. There are 3 groups of such size in the entire state now. And with the ability to read off-site, read remotely, a large network of, a group of 50 or 60 or 120 that covers multiple hospitals, the person who's the best at reading a particular study can be can be fed that particular study, a steady diet of that
Right.
particular study.
Mhm.
And it enables people to reach their subspecialty expertise across an entire network or health system or multiple health systems. And it's clearly a better clinical way to practice. It's better for patients. It's better for referring providers. It's better for health systems. Those are our customers. We believe that model is more successful, and the changes already occurred. The only place where that smaller kind of practice is viable is the kind of place where there are geographic barriers that prevent a group from linking up with somebody else, and even that, as Tom's talking about, that's breaking down as groups start to collaborate with each other in given regions.
Sure.
Professionally.
Sure. And I presume hospitals that you service are almost requiring this type of subspecialization in their contracting, et cetera, now at this point.
Yeah, it's mostly referring physician driven.
Mhm.
The referring physicians have a level of expectation that the bar has been lifted very, very continuously over the last 20 to 30 years. It's no longer acceptable for a small general group of 9 people to be providing orthopedic musculoskeletal MR imaging for
Sure.
for high-level sports medicine practice, or stroke interventional imaging for a tertiary neurology practice. Those
Yeah.
those days are gone.
Yeah.
So it is mostly driven by referring physicians, but yes, health systems see those requirements as well.
So as we see this regionalization and some merging, affiliating with an MSO like Unified Radiology, um, how as physicians have you been able to come together and say, okay, um, we at Colorado Imaging Associates, we trust what another group in Unified is doing. In other words, how have you brought that under one kind of clinical quality umbrella? I don't know if I'm asking that properly, but how have you been able to overcome what I heard for years as well? They just don't read as well as we do. I mean, how do you build that trust within a large MSO like Unified?
Yeah, Tom has spoken to that to some degree. It began with social interaction and kind of high-level clinical interaction between the leadership of the groups that were previously clients of MBMS, still are clients of MBMS. And that was something that continued for many years on a biannual basis. And organically, there began to be trust between the leaderships of the practices. And this is happening in a milieu where there is consolidation in radiology and in health systems. And the leadership of the various groups could see that it would be advantageous, that we'd be stronger together than we would be individually.
Mhm.
And that was obviously accelerated by the rapid growth of corporate radiology in the last 5 years. It became necessary for survival for us as independent groups to consider how
Mhm.
we can achieve the same kind of scale that these corporate practices are aiming for, because we know that those corporate practices, they have their suits in our C-suite, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. They're making their pitch. How do we fend that off? How can we achieve similar benefits of
Mhm.
scale and size without having to be dependent on an outside private equity or venture capital backed corporate entity?
What does the future of Unified Radiology look like to you?
I think it's very bright. We have a lot of intrinsic trust that we've built. We've worked together on some back office type measures, malpractice, credentialing, business management services. We're having success in those arenas. We're having success in the information technology arena, trying to build together a common platform, with the holy grail clinically being a teleradiology service that can work among all the groups in the practice. That's our goal. I believe the future is very bright. I think that what Tom said is true. About 80% of graduating fellows are looking for private practice. And if they can achieve the same benefits of a national practice with scale that can command attention from regional health systems that a corporate entity can provide, I believe we'll be very well positioned for the very best and brightest people in radiology.
That's great. And Tom, last word on this. You've spent a lot of time bringing groups together over the years and just having these conversations. How does Unified Radiology, the future of Unified, look to you?
Really bright. I like Kevin, love the interaction between groups all over the country. Some maybe, having a health system situation that then is created on the West Coast and then comes to the East Coast, or a group where corporate radiology grew out in a particular area and somebody else wants to know, how can we fend that off? And so I just love watching the interaction. And as Kevin said, what we've been able to do is build a level of trust amongst the people. And that leads to collaboration. So people are more willing to, say, jump in on a technology platform that, for our members to jump in on medical malpractice. Those kinds of things become easier when you trust somebody. And then, the final frontier, I think, for us is to help our groups in each of the regions become the strongest they can be. We have, in certain circumstances, multiple groups in a particular region that are already talking. Would they be better, together? And can, we sponsor a way that they start going to dinner, or, whatever it is that it takes. So I think we're seeing that we're able to provide services on a national level that many of our groups wouldn't imagine they could do it by themselves. And then also kind of begin this discussion about, in their particular region, how do they become the market leader and driving independent radiology? So
Sure.
I think it's really bright.
Well, it's been a great opportunity to host this conversation with Tom Schovee and Dr. Kevin Woolley and their insights on how to strengthen independent private practice radiology. So as we discussed, there are regional and national MSOs like Unified Radiology that have helped radiologists remain independent while giving them the tools they need to compete in today's constantly changing market. With over 600 radiologists, Unified Radiology is poised to grow and provide industry-leading services to its members, including management services, technology, and teleradiology. So for more information on Unified Radiology, I would encourage you to visit unifiedradiology.com. Thank you for joining us.